Hello, I'm Sumit Bose. Welcome to the Net Hero podcast. This podcast is for you if you're interested in business and reducing our carbon footprint. Our belief is that better business leads to a better planet. Who wouldn't want to make things that have less impact on our society? It's a podcast for people who are inventors, academics, people working in the energy sector, or from any different field that believe that they can do something better to make the products and services we use every day less harmful. Now, we've been running for about 3 years and it's been very successful with about 36,000 downloads and plenty more, massive engagement. But this show now needs a sponsor. We've done it editorially for all these years, but we need your help. So we know you've got a loyal audience out there. If you'd like to get involved and sponsor the show, then email me on the email just below on your screen. And we'd like to see if you're the right fit for us and that you've got the same vision we have. Now, on to this week's episode. Oh, it's lighter than air, hydrogen. Now, it depends where you're sitting. Some people say it's the absolute future for us. Will play a massive role in decarbonising things like trains and shipping and maybe even cars. Others say it's a complete folly. Waste of time, waste of energy. Most of it comes from the hydrocarbon sector anyway. It doesn't do the math. It doesn't make the money. There's no point doing it. And there's been a vociferous debate out there from people who are kind of pro-hydrogen and people who are so vehemently anti-hydrogen, I couldn't even tell you. And I've had a few rows with a few of them. My view is very simple. I think there's a role to it. But how do we find out if that's really the case? Well, the National Physical Laboratory, which is a government sort of research body, has been doing some work on it. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by Al-Sikab, who's one of the researchers who worked on this report and can give us an idea of what hydrogen really means for our world of the future heading to net zero. Ali, hello, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, good. Let's go through the beginning of it. I've already sort of said how young you are, so I won't go into that, but God, I now am feeling like I'm that fossilized gas now talking to the new lighter future. But in terms of what the National Physical Laboratory does, I went there years ago down in Teddington. Can you explain to our audience, what is it and who runs it and what's the work you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on.
My pleasure.
So as National Physical Laboratory suggests, as the name suggests, we are based all around the UK, but our main hub is in Teddington in London, which is where I'm recording from today. And we are publicly owned. So we're owned by the Department for Science, Technology and Innovation. Our main purpose is as a national metrology institute. So we're there to support primary measurement standards throughout the UK. But we have over 800 scientists working over a huge range of science. So we have scientists working in the quantum, supporting measurements and accuracy in measurements in that field, but also all the way to things like, as we suggested, green technologies, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So while we're not there to be pioneering, making new inventions, we are there to be making the research methods of the future and ensuring those research methods are as accurate as possible to support the UK's prosperity.
What's the difference between you and a university? Because loads of universities do research. There are university-funded studies done by the government. What makes your work different?
That's a good question. I'd say where NPL sits is quite unique. We are sort of in between supporting the government and sort of being around measurements and standards, but we're also in between research as well. So we're kind of a hybrid. And so where a university might be doing the more sort of blue sky thinking type of research, sort of, doing new all the time, we're there to make sure that when that new science is coming along, we're making sure that the research is as accurate as possible. And because we sit in that unique sort of hybrid field, we can be depended on as that sort of place of absolute accuracy and can be depended on by researchers around the UK.
So let's talk about how it works. We'll talk about hydrogen in a minute, but someone comes up with a theory, publishes some papers. Would you guys then look at it, test it out, and then report to the government, say, let's just make something up. There's a new flying car, right? There's a new flying car. They go, this is brilliant. It's going to work, and it'll revolutionise transport. Government thinks, well, this will be quite good. We can fly people around that, and it's all green. Would you go and look at the science, then actually robustly critique the scientists who did it, And then would you give advice to the government to say, yeah, go ahead and do this? Or would you not do that? Would you just say, here's what we find?
So that's honestly quite close to the type of communications and how we work with private research as well. So we would be there to, we could be given a product, we would be there to validate that product.
Right.
And sort of work independently with our own measurement techniques to ensure and then reassure governments or investors that, yes, this works or no, it doesn't.
And in terms of that, do you give like an advisory role, or do you just give a factual report saying, yes, this does this and this doesn't do this? Or do you actually say, we should adopt this or we shouldn't adopt this? Just so I can clarify for our listeners where you sit.
No, absolutely. So it really depends on what the customer wants, but we do both. We can work in a consultancy field, but we also work in, if someone just wants a report to say this works, this didn't, we do that as well.
And you work for both government and for private companies?
Yes. So it's a little difficult to understand, I would say, but absolutely owned by the government.
Right.
But private companies will come to us either through the government and say, we want to help in this research, and
Gotcha.
the government can lead us to lead them to us, or they'll come to us directly and we can support them in their research.
Let's talk about hydrogen. I gave a little intro there saying it's one of those things that it's marmite. It's the marmite of net zero. People love it or hate it. Before we go into what you've been doing in the report, where do you see hydrogen being, and what's your personal view?
So you're absolutely right. It's one of those things that I think everybody's heard of, but people don't really associate it with being this net zero Swiss Army knife, which people ascribe it to be, right?
Yeah.
And I had this discussion with some members of the public recently, and I said, how do you think we can use hydrogen for energy? And the main thing people said, I would say almost 90% of the time, is they would say we can burn it and we can use it as a combustion fuel. And the same, we use petrol and diesel. And while that's absolutely correct, we can do that. People don't associate hydrogen with actually generating electricity. And I think that's one of the main parts of the science communication we need to get to. And it's the simple fact that the UK is anticipating hydrogen to account for between 20 and 35% of all electricity used in the year 2050, which is a huge amount.
Massive.
To put that into context, that's
massive.
That's the equivalent of all the electricity we use today, all from hydrogen. And I think people should know that, we have hydrogen in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the clothes we wear. But people need to know that it's also going to be a huge role in net zero. But where is that role going to come from? And we already use hydrogen a lot in industrial processes, chemical processes. Decarbonizing those fields is going to be essential. And so taking that away from grey, dirty hydrogen to electrolyzed green hydrogen is going to be essential. But then other fields, such as the transportation sector, they can't simply only rely on batteries, for example. And so those very difficult fields to decarbonize will need to transition to hydrogen. And so that's where its potential really comes to light.
You've done a report, the NPL. It's called Measurement Challenges in the Hydrogen Sector. Before we go into it, who asked you to do this report, and what were you asked to look at?
Sure. So NPL's role in the hydrogen space came to light around 10 or so years ago. And in 2017, we released sort of an initial report looking at what challenges there are. This is an update to that report. It's a way to say, we've come a long way since 2017.
Yeah.
These are now the challenges for now and the future. And it's also there to reflect the updated strategy from the government when it comes to hydrogen as well. So it's there as a sort of showcase of what those challenges are. And again, because NPL sits at that unique viewpoint of measurement, we're not just looking at every challenge. We're looking at where measurement and metrology can have a huge impact on those challenges, where that measurement can be used to solve those challenges. And at the same time, it's there to showcase NPL's role in that transition towards net zero as well, and what work we've been doing as well.
So is this just a follow-up from what government asked you to do back in 2017? Or is it something you've just done yourselves as a kind of state of the nation kind of report on hydrogen?
I think it's more from ourselves rather than being sanctioned by government, yeah.
So you looked at the things that kind of probably make sense for most people. How do you make it? Production. You looked at storage, distribution, and then obviously end users. Let's go through each of those. Let's do a bit of kid science. How is it made at present? And where do you see, if we're going to get to that figure you said, about sort of 30%, how we're going to make more of it? So give the audience an idea of how hydrogen is made right now.
Absolutely. So at present, 96% of all hydrogen in the world is made from carbon emitting thermal processes. So that's things like steam reforming processes. And essentially, the main thing you need to know from that is we're burning things that have hydrogen in them.
Right.
We're capturing the hydrogen,
Yeah.
and it's emitting CO2 as well.
Gotcha.
This is called grey hydrogen. It's carbon emitting, and it's something we want to transition away from. The other 4% is made from electrolysis, which is simply the conversion of water to hydrogen using electricity. And that's a very useful method. However, at the moment, it's far too expensive, and actually lowering the price of that so that it is cost competitive, or at least close to being cost competitive with the carbon emitting grey hydrogen, is where we are at the moment.
And that for me is the idea is, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a wind turbine, or you have a solar panel, it generates electricity, and then you use that to electrolyze water and extract the hydrogen. So in effect, the hydrogen is clean.
Absolutely. So I guess the real benefit for hydrogen is that, we have a lot of curtailment in this country, and across the world there's a lot of curtailment with solar panels and wind turbines, where when they're emitting too much power and when it's too sunny or a very windy day, there aren't enough batteries, or the grid is too full to actually take that electricity.
Correct.
And so we just turn those things off.
Yes.
Using that extra power to electrolyze water and turn it to hydrogen is where the real, cost reductions and cost savings are going to come from in terms of hydrogen, because you can store it sort of indefinitely as long as you have a big enough underground storage, for example. And so it's one of those things which that's one of those methods where green hydrogen really does have a future.
So one of the things people talk about is, you've addressed it, is the cost of it. They say it's, it doesn't make economic sense. And the other side of it is they say it just takes too much energy. For the energy you're going to get, you've got to electrolyze the water and all of that. In this report, what have you looked at in terms of how we get over those barriers for production?
One of the challenges we've looked into is actually being able to standardize and improve the actual electrolyzer technology itself. So we have this device, it uses electrochemistry, it's called an electrolyzer, and it has a lot of metals which can be quite expensive within them, and the device can be improved in its durability, but also its efficiency as well. And one of the things we've looked into is actually standardizing how we look at how well this device is doing. And if we do that, if we standardize that measurement process, we can then improve the intercomparison between different materials used in electrolyzer technologies. And when you have improved intercomparison, well, then you have a better idea of what's doing better. And then that can therefore de-risk investment, for example, which is very, very important.
Right.
Because once you've done that, you can then accelerate your transition towards net zero. You can have more investors. You can also just get a better product, which is, of course, very important. That's just one of the challenges we've looked into. We've also looked into improving how we look into the technology itself, where we can improve actually looking into, while it's running, actually looking into how these components are performing. And also looking into actually reducing the amount of these precious materials that we use as well.
So in my idiot brain, you're looking at making the process of it more reliable, more productive, and less polluting as such. So you get bigger return for the amount of electrolysis you're doing. You get more hydrogen.
Yeah, and I guess where metrology comes into it, just to bring it back to that, it's improving the metrology we use to actually diagnose those devices.
Gotcha.
So that we can have more, again, de-risking investment and so on.
So what's the conclusion? Can we get more production and more cleaner production?
Absolutely. I think one of the main problems with the production of hydrogen is not actually necessarily the technology itself, but it's this chicken and egg problem, which I think we'll probably come back to later in this podcast, which is that there's people who can produce hydrogen, but there's no one to use it. And people who want to use it, but no one's producing it.
And
I think that's where government does step in. and this, I guess, is more my viewpoint than
Yeah, of
NPL's.
course.
At the moment, one of the main strategies government is doing is actually telling investors that we're going to standardize the price of hydrogen so that there is less of a risk. It's not going to be produced at cost. It's going to be at cost of what the government standardizes, and therefore that's going to really allow this economy of hydrogen to be self-sustainable. And in the future, that's going to obviously seek huge dividends for the government as well. To answer your question, I do think there is a strong potential future for green hydrogen production.
But that depends on A, the technology improvement, B, investors feeling that they're going to get enough return, yeah?
Absolutely.
Storage. Oh my God, it explodes. Everyone's scared of it. They think about the Hindenburg
Yes.
and all of that stuff.
Yes.
I've always, I've learned a bit about hydrogen. There's a lot of stuff we'll talk about in a second about distribution, this stuff, but storing this stuff, do we store it as a gas? Do we turn it into a liquid? What's the safest way of storing it? And what have you found when you've been looking around to see what's being used today and what you think as an institute should be used in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So hydrogen's main advantage is, of course, it's quite light. So it's around, I don't know the numbers exactly, but it's around 4 times lighter than if you were to store diesel or petrol, which is a great thing. Its main problem is its volume. So once you shrink it down, even as a gas, can still take up a huge volume. And so because of that, it really depends on your use case as to how you're going to end up storing the hydrogen. So if you were to have it in a Toyota Mirai, which is just a light duty passenger vehicle, storing it as a gas at around 3 bar works absolutely fine. You only need around 5 kilograms of hydrogen for a full tank on the Toyota Mirai.
Fine.
However, one industry which is really looking at hydrogen for its potential is the airline industry, for example.
Yeah.
And they are almost 100% going to be using hydrogen as a liquid to overcome that problem.
And it's very heavy, isn't it? For it going in the wings and all the aerodynamics, that's a real problem, isn't it?
So when it comes to the airline industry, hydrogen will not be stored in the wing. It'll actually be stored in liquid hydrogen at the back of the plane.
Right.
And that has its own advantages. So it means that we can actually now make more aerodynamic airline structures because we won't have to store any fuel on the wing, which we currently do with kerosene, for example. But liquid hydrogen does have its own problems. It's literally rocket fuel in the end. Yeah. That's what rocket fuel is. Mm-hmm. And one of the challenges we're looking into in this report when it comes to liquid hydrogen storage is at the moment, we don't really have a strong candidate for a material which can withstand the huge fluctuations in temperatures while storing hydrogen safely. And those will likely be composite materials going into the future. And we want to develop the challenge is developing infrastructure which can test these storage materials at cryogenic temperatures in hydrogen environments. At the moment, that infrastructure not only doesn't belong within the UK, but doesn't really belong in Europe. And that's a challenge which will need to be overcome the next 10, 15 years to realize the potential of hydrogen in the airline industry. But then again, hydrogen, in the same way we store natural gas, can be stored in underground storage, which is already being done in Teesside, for example, here in the UK. So again, hydrogen's advantage is it's quite versatile in the way it can be stored.
So you could say, thinking about all the things, as we stop doing natural gas extraction from the North Sea, the big caverns, the volumes of rock, you could get your hydrogen, pump it and store it, then leave it as a gas, yeah? But the obvious thing is people want it on land in an easier form rather than piping it all out, and that is liquid. If that challenge of the materials you talked about, which is really interesting, and that kind of triggered me, that whole thing is, again, a bit of a problem because unless people see there's a market for storing liquid hydrogen, they won't go and make the composite materials to store it in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and again, that's where sort of
you need policy.
There has to be a chance taken and new policy which says that we have to put this investment in now to make that sustainable economy, because you're absolutely right. It's a chicken and egg problem again.
Let's talk about getting it out. All right. You've solved it. Well done. You're very smart, Ali. I know you are. So you've solved it. We've got a composite tank. We're using old reservoirs in the North Sea, and we've got loads of hydrogen and we need it. How the hell do we get it out? Now, again, this one, I've talked to National Gas and other people. There was supposed to be a trial of distribution, which I don't really know where it's gone. But the idea was that, yes, you can put it through the pipes and you can transmit it, same as the gas pipes. Now, is that fact or fiction? Because I've heard sort of contradictory views on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, there's sort of a mixture of different pipelines we have within the UK,
Yeah.
just from town gas to high-grade steel to low-grade steel. And for the most part, hydrogen can be transported within these. However, in high-grade steel, it can permeate, which sort of is counterintuitive. In high-grade steel, it permeates, and low-grade steel, it doesn't as much. But which is really counterintuitive. But that is
Yeah, you would think it'd be the other way around.
yeah, exactly right. But there is a huge momentum behind actually building dedicated pipeline to hydrogen-based pipelines, and those will be made of polymer composite materials,
Right.
so they won't be metallic in nature, and that will substantially reduce the permeability of hydrogen. And it's one of the fields that we're really working on here at NPL to be able to quantify, again, that idea of metrology, to quantify the permeability of these materials with hydrogen and at different pressures, different temperatures. So it is really an interesting field.
They talk about leakage a lot because we get leakage in gas at present. And there are lots of people who have got big concerns. You're talking about the permeability, that, you seep out hydrogen, flipping heck, is a lot more explosive than natural gas. So these are all big challenges for us to sort out before we can transport it with the level of confidence the public would want. Do you know what I mean?
You're right. So, and another aspect of that is that because hydrogen is so small, it's more likely to leak.
Right.
More of it can escape through a smaller hole. And one of the things that the UK and NPL are working on at the moment is that we've been very good at quantifying methane leaks from huge test facilities. And that's because we can use infrared to detect methane and be like, okay, it's there. That's how much it is. We can now solve that leak. You can't do that with hydrogen. It just doesn't appear in the infrared spectrum.
Oh.
So sort of where the science is being worked on now is actually using Raman-based technologies.
I have no idea what that is. Explain that to me.
It's really not my field, but I guess just to be able to communicate it, it's essentially a way we can be able to quantify and see hydrogen through an equipment or a whole test facility.
Yeah.
And it's a way we can say that, if you already have a methane-based test facility, you want to retrofit it for hydrogen. We're developing equipment so that we can be able to detect leaks from far away, which is going to be very useful from everything from a small device that we use in our lab here all the way to a huge test facility as well. So we will be able to quantify leaks and detect them for hydrogen in the future, and it's something that's being worked on.
Cost. I need to ask you that question. Getting it out, there's a cost. If we have to retrofit all our pipelines with this new composites that you're talking about, that's a flipping big challenge. And again, this is one of the things that people throw against hydrogen. Do you see different solutions for it? You said some pipes could handle it at present right now. So do you actually think that the cost wouldn't be over prohibitive?
It's a very difficult question because it's one of those things where I think the easy answer is just to say that investing now in solving our decarbonization problems, in investing in net zero, is going to far outweigh the cost of if we don't.
Yeah,
I think that's always what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Right.
But you and I know it's, you can see what's going on with the government right now. It's all about economics at the end of the day and what people feel they can stomach. So that's the issue, isn't it? Will investors go, I'll lay out for it, or I'll make a plant, knowing that this is kind of, are you actually making any money for this infrastructure because you don't have a market for it yet?
Yeah, I think something that we can, just to put it into context, the UK was completely based on town gas, which is a hydrogen-based gas in the past. And that was in the 1950s, I believe.
Yeah.
And, we found natural gas in the North Sea and we converted pretty much all our pipeline.
True. Yeah.
And that was post-World War II. So the economics of the world weren't very strong then either. And so it's something that has been done in the past, and I believe it will be done again in the future. And again, we aren't completely retrofitting every pipeline in the UK. We do have a bit of a head start with hydrogen being, quite user friendly when it comes to the current pipeline we do have.
Yeah, gotcha.
So I think the costs aren't as much as people expect, but of course it's still a cost.
Last one, end users. What the hell am I going to do? You talked a little bit about airplanes, and I said right at the beginning of the intro, I can see it being used in shipping. I can see it being used in rail and probably flight. And I've driven the Marine. I loved it. I love the way that you could just, literally 2 minutes, like filling up a tank, boom, and I went. But it's not really taken off here. I think there are 2 hydrogen fueling stations in the whole of the southeast. I don't know if there's any up north. So, and that's because no one's promoted it. EVs have sort of taken over. Fuel cells haven't gone there. So where do you see the end user using hydrogen, and what kind of end user would be using it?
Absolutely. So someone actually told me a really good line recently, which is we haven't found what the laptop was to the lithium-ion battery for hydrogen.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I get it.
We haven't found that. And, people anticipated passenger vehicles like the Toyota Mirai to be a little more prosperous. And to be honest, battery electric vehicles have done really well. However, when you really compare the advantages of a hydrogen electric vehicle versus a battery electric vehicle, there are inherent benefits to using hydrogen over batteries. And so I think a lot of people in my industry, in the hydrogen industry, have sort of accepted that maybe light duty passenger vehicles,
it won't happen. Yeah.
They're not for hydrogen. And, maybe that's fair. I do believe maybe there will be a chance the technology comes back to being,
Understood,
back to hydrogen. However, where hydrogen does have a huge place is in heavy duty transport. You can't rely on
the weight of the batteries alone would be huge.
The weight of the batteries, the how long they take to refuel, how quickly they degrade, how they don't work in cold climates. There's so many use cases for hydrogen when it comes to that. And as you said, buses, trains, trucks, airplanes, and so on. However, end use is not just transport. End use is also industrial processes which will need to decarbonize.
Right. Yeah.
At the moment, for example, the steel industry uses natural gas to have that high temperature so that steel can be manufactured. And hydrogen is actually the only technology that's capable of decarbonizing it there. And that's a huge industry where huge amounts of green hydrogen will be needed and used. The same goes for the glass and ceramic industry as well. And so again, there's this Swiss Army knife argument where we can use hydrogen for a lot of things, but there needs to be an industry which goes first, if you know what I mean.
So let's conclude all this. Hydrogen, yay or nay?
I think yay. Obviously, I wouldn't be in this industry if I wasn't.
Slightly
yay.
Loaded for you.
Yeah, a little bit. It's one of those things which I think it's happening. We aren't waiting for it anymore. It's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think there's a lot of people who just there's I don't know what it is, and I don't know why you think there is, but I've met some very senior people, some names you'll probably know, one in particular who literally hates it, and you just wonder why. You do wonder why people have got this. My view is there is not one path to net zero. You've got to have a mix of things, and I definitely think hydrogen's got a role to play. How's it going to win the PR battle, do you think? Because there are a lot of voices against it.
I think it's a very difficult one. I think science communication podcasts like this are the way forward for hydrogen. I think industries which absolutely need it, such as the industrial processing industry, I think it's going to start there. That's where we're going to see it in the next, hopefully, 5 to 10 years. After that, we're already going to have places making the green hydrogen. Hopefully the cost comes down. And then it's just going to be an economics argument. Your fuel is going to be cheaper. You're going to have, therefore, more of an argument to build a refueling station.
Yep.
And then people end up buying some buses and trucks. And so it's definitely going to take time. It needs some patience. But as you said, it's just another part of this net zero project. It's not hydrogen or batteries. It has to be both.
Brilliant. Ali, thank you so much for taking an old man through new science. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
No. It's been brilliant. Is it www.npl.co.uk/hydrogen, yes?
Perfect, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll stick that on the screen. And if you're listening to the podcast, npl.co.uk/hydrogen, have a look at that report. Ali, it's been really good to talk to you. Thank you for coming on, because I think it's great to have some sort of scientific, non-biased view of it, because it can be one of those very kind of, as I said at the beginning, divisive things. So appreciate it. Keep doing your good work.
Will do. Thank you very much.
What's your thoughts on hydrogen? Come on, You know you've always got a view, so get in touch on social media, let us know, get involved. We'll be doing 100 days of the Labour government in October, and maybe we'll be talking about one of these topics as well. If you'd like to be on the podcast, get in touch, nethero@futurenetzero.com. I'm Sumit Bose. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you to my guest Ali today, and keep subscribing.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.